Two large storms will be coming to the United States over the next few days, and these will both bring their fair share of severe weather to areas like the northern and central plains, the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and the Northeast, bringing the potential for damaging winds, large hail, and tornadoes. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about the severe weather threat. In addition to that, we're going to be talking about the tropics, as they are going to be heating up a lot more as we go into September in the Atlantic Ocean. We are going to begin with what's happening across the United States right now, and overall we've had a pretty active last 24 hours. We had a large severe weather event take place yesterday, anywhere from the northern plains back into parts of the western Midwest. The worst places really yesterday were South Dakota and Minnesota. We ended up having some pretty significant damaging winds near Minneapolis, upwards of 70 miles per hour. If you watched our live stream yesterday, you saw that in real time. Back over in South Dakota, we had also another line of storms there that turned into a Boeing segment, producing damaging winds as well. And then over in northeast Nebraska, we also had a few big hailstorms. Upwards of 4 inches in diameter for hail fell in a few areas, which was pretty crazy. Now, a lot of this activity is starting to wind down. Overall, we do have storms that are moving into Michigan this morning. We also have storms that are moving into western Wisconsin that are going to produce some damaging winds, and as well as maybe an isolated large hailstone or two. And then as we go later into today, we're going to see a reinitiation of storms across the Midwest, where more severe weather will be a possibility. On the flip side of things are just really quiet right now in the Northeast, Ohio Valley, and the Southeast, but that will change if you're in the Ohio Valley and the Northeast tomorrow, as there is a risk for severe weather in parts of those areas. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next few days, and we'll begin with today, which is tossing trampolines on Tacos Tuesday. We do have a slight risk for severe weather across the Midwest, northern Ohio Valley, and the Great Lakes region like Michigan. In addition to that, we have a marginal threat that extends all the way back to Kansas and Nebraska. Now, the main concern back over in the Central Plains will be wind and hail. Now, we are going to be watching for wind and hail as the primary concerns in that slight risk as well, but there will be a potential for an isolated tornado or two. One thing I do want to point out before I show you the specific probabilities for everything is that we could see the slight risk expand down into areas like central and northern Illinois, and as well as into eastern Iowa and northern and central Indiana later today, and that is going to depend on what exactly happens, I think, this morning, because we have a lot of storms out there this morning that are going to stabilize the atmosphere in some areas, and that's going to play a key part into what we see today for severe weather. So the primary concern, again, will be damaging winds and hail, but the tornado threat is really low today. It's not really a high risk by any means. It's definitely low, but that tornado risk is going to be most known and noticeable across parts of central and southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, and as well as back through central Michigan. I also wouldn't be surprised if that tornado risk goes a little bit further to the north to include parts of the upper Michigan Peninsula and northeastern Wisconsin, which I'll show you more about here in just a second. And as we go into Wacky Weather Wednesday, we do have two slight risks for severe weather. We have one back up in North and South Dakota, and another one back over in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, where the potential for damaging winds and hail will be the main concerns. We also have a large marginal threat that goes into the Ohio Valley and back through Missouri, where there will be a potential for isolated damaging winds and hail. Now, the good news is that right now there is no tornado risk outlined for Wednesday across the United States. I still wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado or two, though, up in North or South Dakota, and I'll show you why here in a few minutes. I also wouldn't rule out a brief spin up somewhere over New York and Pennsylvania. Just a couple areas to watch for. I could see there being maybe a small 2% in the next outlook for one of these two areas. Now, today's tornado threat in the Midwest is going to be relatively low, but there are a couple of areas that I'm watching for the greatest potential for an isolated tornado later today. Overall, there's two areas. So the first one will be back up in the upper Michigan Peninsula and northeast Wisconsin during the afternoon hours, where I could see an isolated tornado or two being a possibility in this area. And also back over in northern Illinois, I wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado, as storms will fire off. Those initial supercells could produce an isolated tornado threat, but the general idea for today is that the threat for severe weather is mostly going to be damaging winds and hail. I don't expect that much of a tornado risk. And overall in Michigan, we could see an isolated tornado in Michigan too. It's just going to be really low, and it's really could literally be anywhere, probably in northern Michigan though, if we do have anything like that. Here's what the future radar looks like for today. So as we go throughout the morning, storms move into Wisconsin and Iowa. They'll kind of die out as we go into the afternoon hours. There's a lot of uncertainty still exactly when and where storms will fire up this afternoon, purely due to the fact that we are going to have storms out there this morning, which will stabilize the atmosphere. Depending on where those go and how long they last will make a big difference this afternoon. But what we think is going to happen is that storms will try to fire up in the upper Michigan Peninsula in northeast Wisconsin around 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon. These on the HRRR model look like they're all rotating and all producing tornadoes, but I don't really think that's going to happen. I could see there being, though, a tornado or two back up in the upper Michigan Peninsula or Wisconsin. I think it'll cluster together pretty quickly and turn into a line of thunderstorms as that moves into Michigan as we go later into the afternoon and into the early evening. And then around 5 to 6, storms will start to fire off in Illinois and Iowa, and this is expected to quickly become a line of thunderstorms. So any tornado threat would be very short-lived, in my opinion. And then as we go into the evening and then closer to about 10 to 11 o'clock, storms are moving towards Chicago and eventually into eastern Illinois, and then after that they'll be moving into Indiana. And then eventually, as we go into the overnight hours, they'll be moving throughout Michigan and northwest Ohio, where damaging winds will be the main concern. And then we're done as we go into Wednesday. We are going to be on standby today for a live stream in case we have to go live, either for the tornado threat up here or even the potential for significant damaging winds back over in the northern Illinois region and even eastern Iowa, and then eventually Indiana. We'll be keeping a close eye on this in case we do have to go live today. Now, as we go into tomorrow, the tornado threat will drop off, at least in the northeast. We're going to have a very low tornado potential in Pennsylvania and New York. Overall, not really expecting much. Maybe just an isolated brief tornado would really be about all for Wednesday. Here's what the storms look like for Wednesday. Again, pretty dry for the morning and early afternoon. Few storms perhaps near New York City, Connecticut, maybe even southeast New York during the afternoon. Pop-up thunderstorms, pretty ordinary stuff for this time of the year, will kind of fire off across Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Kentucky. As we get closer to about 6 o'clock, storms will continue to move to the east, mainly with an isolated damaging wind and hail threat. Again, I'm not super concerned right now about what's going to happen on Wednesday. We could get something a little bit more organized, maybe up here in like New York and northern Pennsylvania in the morning hours on Wednesday, but that would really be about it. So I'm not really too concerned about Wednesday, just something to watch for isolated wind and hail. And if anything does change, we'll keep you posted with the latest. Now, as we go into Wednesday, I think Wednesday might be one of the most interesting days of the week, but it is a bit conditional. This is what we're looking at for Wednesday for the tornado parameter values. I could see there being a photogenic tornado or two, either in South or North Dakota, and you might not be in these areas, but it actually is a pretty interesting setup. The hodographs on Wednesday are really curved. I mean, we got really curved hodographs here across both South and North Dakota, but especially South Dakota, and I could see there being a tornado somewhere in the center of South Dakota on Wednesday. So beyond Wednesday, things are going to get a pretty interesting, at least in the northern plains, and then eventually the Midwest again, because as we go into Thursday, we have another trough. This one's actually going to be coming out of Canada, though, a little bit different, because the one that we were talking about over the last couple of days, including today, was the one that came over the Rocky Mountains. This one's going to be coming out of Canada, so overall, I don't think severe weather is going to be nearly as prominent, but I think as we go into Thursday afternoon, we're going to have another threat for severe weather across the Midwest and as well as back through the Central Plains. And then as we go into Friday, which is Flying Fences Friday, I could see there being some flying fences anywhere from Canada back even into parts of the Central Plains and maybe the Ohio Valley with more of a wind hail threat, maybe even a couple of tornadoes, even Thursday or Friday. And then as we go into Saturday, that threat for any severe weather would move into the mid-Atlantic and Northeast. Doesn't look like a huge threat by any means, but just something to watch for. And then next week, guess what? The big old H returns to the Midwest, which is going to keep a lot of areas dry. The only exception would be the Gulf Coast. I think we're going to have an active weather pattern next week in the southern plains and the southeast, which is a change. We haven't really had an active weather pattern, at least even in Texas, for weeks now. It's been actually probably months since the last time we've had much rain there. Now, you got to shut the front door because we actually have tropic activity in late August. I know it's shocking. Late August, tropics, they don't go together, right? Well, they obviously do, but we haven't had any tropic activity here in weeks. It's kind of crazy to say that we've had nothing, and we finally have a new area of development. It feels really weird to not have anything this time of the year, but we do now have an area of development, low chance of development over the next 7 days, but I would expect a tropical storm to develop somewhere in the western Atlantic Ocean as we go into early September, and that could go towards the United States. And the reason why this is a possibility is when you look at the ensemble members, which show you basically a bunch of models all embedded into one graphic, you'll notice this tropical wave moving across the Atlantic Ocean. Still a relatively large spread of where this wave will be, but several members basically of this ensemble do bring this at least to a tropical storm level or tropical depression level by the time we go towards September 1st or 2nd. And then from there, many of them do have this intensifying into a tropical storm or hurricane back over near the Lesser Antilles. Now, the one thing to keep in mind here is that a lot of these ensemble members curve this back out to sea, but we are still several days out, and the smallest change to the south could bring these all towards the Gulf. So there's a lot of changes that could basically happen over the next few days and even over the next week, so something to keep in mind. Also, a lot of ensemble members in the long term have something in the Gulf of Mexico, so obviously we are getting to the time of the year where we are going to probably see several tropical cyclones within the span of 30 days. This is going to be the period that we're going to be watching for. September, definitely be on alert if you're along the Gulf Coast or the East Coast of the United States. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.